Hey, it's right on 11:30 and I think we should just get started because we've only got half an hour. I feel like half an hour is enough time to get a little bite-sized chunks of bookkeeping, because I think anything more than half an hour, we would lose everyone's attention. It's such a dry subject, isn't it? So, but hopefully I can make it exciting and demystify some of these numbers, especially for our clients that every month I see new clients, and when I'm talking about a profit and loss report, it's just amazing how they glaze over the reports. So I feel like this webinar will, just take the mystery out of these numbers and allow business owners like yourself to make sense of these numbers. So let's make a profit and loss report more meaningful so you can understand the numbers and plan better. So what I'd like to do is explain what is on a profit and loss and what is actually, I suppose, what is going to be meaningful for you as a business owner. Every business is different. Every business has its own nuances. And so a profit and loss should be meaningful to you. So by the end of all of this, I'd like to say that, you should be able to look at your profit and loss and be excited that you can actually plan better and understand what it all means. Because the next webinar, I will be sharing how to create a budget from this. So these little short webinars will be hosted every month. And so you can basically build on it for you and your business. All right, let's get to the slides. So what does a meaningful profit and loss look like? Now, traditionally, you would see a profit and loss report that just states the income, maybe the cost of sales, and just some numbers. So let me explain what this top above the line, when people talk about above the line, what does it actually mean? And what should it look like and mean for you as a business owner in your business and in your type of industry? As you'll see here, I've actually set an example. So normally I see a profit and loss, it just says income or services income, or it just has one line, which actually means nothing. I've given an example of an IT service company, and as you can see, I've actually broke it down into two revenue lines, like professional services and hardware and hardware. You could probably have IT software, subscriptions, all that sort of stuff. So understanding each income line item to give you the total income. It's the same as the cost of sales and direct costs. Now, I can't even tell you how many times I've not seen direct costs in a profit and loss, because a lot of people put it amongst their general expenses and their overall expenses. You can see why when I look at a profit and loss, it's just a maze of numbers. It means nothing, because all you're seeing is what's your revenue and what's your net profit, nothing in between. So if you can create what your direct costs are against your revenue lines, it totally makes more sense. So you can see the income of professional services, you might have consultants that deliver on those professional services. So you can see what that is. And then your hardware costs directly relating to your hardware income, which then gives you your total income minus your total cost of sales, gives you your total gross profit. And as I've got an example there of $900, which shows you a gross margin of 30%. I will go into this more detail in a minute, but I just wanted to give you an understanding of what your income, your direct costs are, and your gross profit and gross margin is from this slide. I'm going to show you another example of what I mean by direct costs. Let's go into it a little bit deeper just for a minute. So the next slide will show you an example of a marketing company. So a marketing company may have the income lines of digital marketing, marketing collateral, events. So 3 income lines. Again, not just one. There is more than one income line for a marketing company. Then you might have a header account in your direct costs. So you might have in digital marketing, you might have digital marketing costs. But in those digital marketing costs, you might have 3 separate sub-accounts. So you might have consultants delivering, you might have web designers, you have third-party providers to deliver the digital marketing income. Same again with marketing collateral. You might have graphic designers, you might have printers. So to drive that revenue, and again with events, you'll have activation launch event companies, you might have conferences, whatever that might be that are directly related to that income. I'll give you the reasons why I'm doing this in a minute. So I just need to understand the concepts right now. And then the gross margins, I've given you an example, is that your digital marketing, you have direct consultants relating to that, and you might have a gross margin of 50%, which is your profit. This is really key to know when you're pricing. You know, when you go and price a job, you go, right, I'm going to make a 50% gross margin on that. You should be able to go back to your profit and loss and see that actually occurs. So what do I mean by direct costs? And what are the benefits? So in my next slide, I will share 4 very clear points on why we like to separate those direct costs. So it enables you to manage your costs against the project at any given time, better management of gross margins. This is probably, point 3 is probably really one key area, and it's to do a sense check that you've actually invoiced your client. Because if your direct cost is over the revenue, perhaps your client invoice is missing. You haven't generated that invoice because God forbid that your direct costs are always more than your income, because then you're really making a loss. And because there's a gross margin per revenue line, direct cost line, it enables you to identify your sales targets per revenue line. So let's go back to the first example that I had. In my next slide, I'll show you that I'm going to relate back to the IT company. So the IT company I shared with you, there was a 30% gross margin on all that, the income versus the cost of sale. And I explained that, you know, your total income minus your total cost of sales gives you a gross profit of $900, which on an overall scheme of things gives you a 30% margin. Now, when I was saying that you have a gross margin for each of those income direct cost lines, this is where it comes in. And it's really key to understand this. So if I look at your IT professional services minus your IT consultants, that line is a 50% gross margin. So then when you go back to your actual profit and loss, when you actually pick up that line of revenue and direct costs, is it according to your pricing and your benchmark? Or is it that you've actually paid your consultants too much? Or have you missed an invoice to your client? But more importantly, it comes down to your pricing. The other one is IT hardware. I've given you an example here of IT hardware income minus your IT hardware costs. Again, demonstrating that there's a 20% margin. Can you see clearly that by showing your income versus your cost of sale against that revenue line, I've got a 50% and a 20% gross margin, which is not your overall 30%. And this is where I see time and time again, people say, I ask people, when I look at your profit and loss, your gross margin is, for example, 30%. And I go, yeah. And I'm like, really? Let me look at your pricing, especially hardware. It's very traditional for IT hardware companies to be making 20% margin. I'm like, I don't think you're making 30% gross margin on your hardware. Let's just dig a bit further. And so this is where you get your balancing of your budgets right as well. Because if you know each of those line items, you can budget for it accordingly. I hope this is making sense. And of course, you know, each business, each industry, they have their nuances. I strongly suggest that you reach out to me and send me an example. Of course, it's highly confidential. I'm happy to help in this area because I think it's probably, I'm going to say it's almost 100% of all clients, new clients that come on board. I am fixing this up for them. And you know what? The light at the end of the tunnel is just incredible because the numbers are transparent. And the planning that you can go, you know, that you can plan around this for growth, but also it helps the sales guys understand what their targets are. All right. So that's income and direct costs on your profit and loss. Let me go to the next item on your profit and loss, and that is overhead expenses. So I'm going to say it's almost 100% new clients. I see this all the time, and I have to say it's my pet hate. I cannot understand why anybody would be giving a business owner a profit or loss with just one big number. It means nothing. And that what I mean by one big number is your overhead expenses. Now, firstly, so when people put their direct costs in their overhead expenses, pull it out. The overhead expenses should be, what is it going to cost the business just to open its doors no matter what? And my real pet hate is seeing a chart of accounts or expenses in A to Z form. You know, you've got advertising, accounting, bank fees, you know, computer expenses, all in alphabetical order. And I'm like, what does that mean? What are you gaining from this? You gain nothing from that. The best way to do it is to group it in subgroups and be more proactive with it. And what do I mean by that? All right, so in my next slide, I've got a bit of an example of what I'm talking about. And this is the first thing I do when I get a hold of someone's accounts. I like to have a header. So you have your administration costs, you have your advertising and marketing, your communication, your computer IT, you know, your employee costs if they're not related to direct costs, of course, insurances, motor vehicle, and premises. These are some of the headers, just to give you an example. And then you've got your subheaders. So then put your communication costs, have your internet, your telephone, landlines and mobiles underneath that. Group it. The other one is computer costs. Now the big one in here is your IT subscriptions. Break it out. Don't just lump it into one, because you know, it is very easy to get caught up in your month-to-month subscription fees and your annual fees. By doing it this way, you can review it and actually just check in to see whether or not those subscription fees are applicable anymore. Are you actually using that software subscription? Is anybody in the firm using it? Question it. But by having these headers and these subheaders, when you go to look at your expenses and you do it on a month-to-month perspective, you can see whether you're up and down in these areas and whether you've actually provisioned for it. So one of the areas that I see time and time again is premises, your rent. So when I look at our profit and loss and I look at month to month, someone might be making fantastic profits in one month and they're not so great the following month. But then by doing it in a header and a subheader format, if 1 month, if the bookkeeper's put an entry in for 2 lots of rent in 1 month, it's very clear that you can see that. And of course, I question it to say, well, why have you got 2 lots of rent in 1 month? And people go, oh, it's a timing issue. I'm like, no. You should have provisioned for that rent. If you happen to pay it on the 31st of the month, and in actual fact, it's for the following month, back it out and make it into the following month. Make it real. Don't put 2 lots of rent in 1 month. But by having it clearly stated like this, you can actually see that it's very clear where the errors lie or where the provisions haven't been accounted for or something's missing. In actual fact, just recently, I pulled out a profit and loss for 6 months worth of costs. And because I grouped it like this, I was like, oh, the group of motor vehicle expenses looks really odd. What's going on with that? After all the recoding I did, I was like, how can there be no petrol costs? Where are they? And of course, they're sitting on someone's private credit card. I'm like, why is that when it's a business expense? But it allows you to see clearly your expenses each month and make some calls on what you need to do with those expenses. Whether if you're in a growth phase, you might want to be ramping those expenses up or not. In actual fact, I've actually outlined in my next slide 4 reasons why you would do this. So firstly, you can see the expense levels month by month. Very clear. 2, it sets budgets and gives the owner of that department accountability. So a really good one is marketing. If you break up your header with advertising and marketing and you have your subheader accounts of, advertising, digital marketing, networking, all the things that tied up in the marketing department, you can give that budget to your team and go, this is what your budget is for the year. And then by them owning it, there is no surprises. Number 3 is easier to identify where you can cut costs if required. So by having, again, these in areas of the business, if the revenue isn't where you need it to be, you can review your expense levels in a much easier way. Especially your employee costs. Your employee costs are your biggest costs in the business. And so you can review those quite easily if you have them in departments and you break them up. And then the 4th one is plan for the spend. So if you clearly know what your advertising and marketing spend is, and if you're in the e-commerce space, for instance, and you go, you know what, traditionally the last 6 months, we've actually spent 5% of our sales in digital marketing, well, then you can plan for the spend and there's no surprises, because as business owners, what do we hate? Surprises in business. So let me just wrap this up. The 3 takeaways that you can take from this today is: review your profit and loss. So when I say review your profit and loss, just grab it out of Xero or grab it out of MYB, whatever software you're using, pull it out. Is there one revenue line? If there's one revenue line, question yourself, should there be more revenue lines in here? If you're a professional services company, what is the areas of professional services that you're offering? You can normally understand that from your pricing models, or your charge out rates. Break it up that way. Next thing is, what are your direct costs? I can tell you now, every business has a direct cost. Every business. You just need to understand what it is. And is it sitting in your general expenses? And if it is, put it into direct costs. And again, the way you can identify that is when you're quoting a job or when you're pricing a job, what is your cost against that revenue? How are you pricing it? Is there a product cost? Is there people cost? What is it? And then look at your general expenses. Is it an A to Z? I can probably tell you it probably is. And then review it and break it up into your groups of your business. So that's something you can do by reviewing your P&L. See if the direct costs are separated to your general expenses. I just mentioned that it is, a lot of the time it is. Pull it out. Then can you work out your gross margins? And then, of course, update the areas of expenses and review your spends. It's quite actually fascinating. I mentioned previously subscriptions, computer software subscriptions. That's probably the most common one that all of a sudden, oh, do I need these? No, I haven't used them for 2 years. Really? Take them out. So hopefully these 3 actions, go away, just have a view of it, and actually you'll probably see some light at the end of reading all of that. I'm really happy to review that for you confidentially. If you want to just email me directly, I'm happy to do that for you. If I can demystify what a P&L looks like for your organization, happy to do, because I see it time and time again. And it just means that when you look at your profit and loss, it just makes more sense to you. If you have any questions, please pop them through now. I'm happy to answer any questions right now. Oh, someone's just asked, how often should we be reviewing our profit and loss statement? That's an easy one. Monthly as a minimum. So a profit and loss statement, depending on your cycle of business. So if it's in hospitality in a cafe, I tend to review that one on a weekly basis, basing on the payroll cycle. And why that is that in hospitality and in restaurants, your margins on your food is really important because of the wastage as well as your people roster. So restaurants and hospitality, I tend to look at it on a weekly basis, but otherwise, other businesses I tend to look on a monthly basis. And at a monthly basis, you should be able to get your benchmark gross margins clearly. And if not, it flags a number of things. Those flags are, have you missed an invoice to a customer? Have you not accounted for something in your expenses? The big one is normally rent. Or, you know, have I not paid a consultant because my margin doesn't look right? And people get really excited. They go, oh, wow, I've just made a massive big profit this month. And then when I go into it, I'm like, you know what? You should be able to actually work out what your profit line is because you've just priced the job, or you know what your margins are. So yeah, you should be able to work it out straight off the bat, know what your profits are. Again, I'm happy to help if need be. A good question. What does engaging Numeric Eight look like? Well, firstly, it's just a conversation. I'm happy just to demystify what we do from a Numeric Eight perspective. You know, our tagline is beyond bookkeeping. And there's a reason why you may have found out in today's webinar, because we do deliver reporting, and it's because we like to educate our clients on understanding what that looks like. Numbers shouldn't be a scary thing. I'd like to know that my clients, we don't like head in the sand sort of stuff. We don't like surprises, and you know, it should be exciting. You know, every business owner is putting so much passion and energy into their business. If we can support and help in demystifying these numbers for them, I would, you know, I'm here to support that. So so it's just a conversation of how we can help you, and if we can support in any way. Thanks, guys. Our time is up. I look forward to sharing more. You know, as I mentioned, we're doing monthly webinars only for half an hour. You don't want to be talking about bookkeeping and numbers for more than half an hour. So if there's a couple of actions that you can take away from this and learn something, I'm absolutely, you know, hoping that this can be helpful. So the next one is on the 19th of April. Let's build a budget. Let's take away all those surprises out of your numbers. So thanks again for joining, and I look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Thanks, guys.